hopefully you are all here for the same thing. Hopefully my computer will continue to live. It's doing some weird things here, so I apologize for the late start. So this is why you should code for free. I will tell you very soon why that's a misnomer, but it was a fun name for a session. See, weird computer stuff.
You're not late, you're 2 minutes early.
Am I really? I thought it was starting at 11:15.
11:20, right?
15. Yeah, 15.
Oh, it is 11:15. My bad, I apologize. I'm a terrible room monitor.
Oh. Well, let's go. Well, we're starting while people are coming in. So. Oh, it's all right. That's if worse comes to worse, I'll shut down and restart, and then life will be good because everything works after restart. So. Let's start with just who the heck am I and why am I talking today? I lead the Nerdery Foundation. So we are the the nonprofit arm related to the Nerdery Custom Software Development and Prime Digital Academy, the boot camp. And our mission in life is to activate technologists to better our world. And so what that means is putting the skills and talents and passions of people with technology skills to work for our communities. So basically getting you all to volunteer and code for nonprofits and eventually other community needs, but starting with the giant opportunity that is the nonprofit world. Most people have heard of the foundation as an entity because we run the Overnight Website Challenge. So we've been holding this since 2008. We hold events here in the Twin Cities coming up in April. You'll hear more about that in a little bit, as well as Chicago, Phoenix, and Kansas City. So since 2008, we've engaged about 1,250 different technology pros, helping 197 nonprofits with, for the most part, about 90% is new websites, but we also do web apps, different app functionalities and portals, as well as some mobile apps. And all told, it's about $6.9 million in professional services that have been offered by the community. We just organize the event, and then everyone volunteers their time for 24 hours straight to build these sites and functions. So that's who we are. We have a little bit of experience with our 197 nonprofits on what works well and what doesn't work well. So that's what we're going to be talking about for the most part today, is how to work with these nonprofits without, driving yourself crazy, and doing the best that we can for the nonprofit community. So we're going to be starting with just some generals about what we're talking about here and why you would want to get involved in this kind of thing, what the benefits are. We'll talk, the majority will be on the how-to, so just how do you start a project, how do you successfully go through it, and how do you conclude. So we'll have some tips and advice for that. And then we'll finish up with just how to find those opportunities in your community. So starting out, so this is where my little misnomer talk comes in. So I called this session Coding for Free. The official word, of course, is pro bono. Pro bono means for the public good, and it's specifically being skill-based. So there's all different kinds of ways to volunteer and give of your time. Pro bono work specifically is doing what you do, what you have skills to do in your day job, and turning that to the needs of the public at large. So it's a little bit different than the word free, because you can do all kinds of free stuff, right? Like giving tech support to your dad is free and uses your skills, not really for the public good. It's more for dad's good. So free is really there's no rules around the word free, right? It's any reason, it has no clear definition. There's nothing codified in IRS law or anything around what free means. So you can do whatever you want for free. For pro bono, it's a little bit more specific. So it does mean that it's for the public good. The easy way for that is to do work for a 501c3 nonprofit. That means they are recognized by the IRS as being an organization for the public good. So anything you do for a nonprofit fits under the pro bono banner. The nice thing here is that it can include some fees. So when you say you're doing work for free, the nonprofit can hear, oh, cool, I don't have any costs associated with this. You'll give me a new website, and there'll be somehow magic, free templates and themes and fonts and hosting, and I won't have to pay for any of that. When we move into the realm of pro bono, there's an accepted definition of that, right? So it means like my work, my time can be free, but you still have some costs. I'm going to need your credit card at some point to get some things done. And that's going to be something you're going to talk about with the nonprofit, but it fits under pro bono as a definition. And there are some elements of pro bono work that are tax deductible. I am not going to go into all the rules for that. Talk to your tax advisor. If I say something wrong, that would be really bad. So I'm not even going to attempt to give tax deduction advice. But know that pro bono work, in addition to obviously a community benefit, has some tax benefits as well. So talking about why you would do this, what the benefits are. The first one is fairly obvious. This is the one that people think of, right? Like it feels good. You, in general, you are doing good for your community. You are helping a specific cause. Hopefully the one that you are dedicating your time to is one that you feel passionate about, whether you care about animal rights or a certain health issue or the environment. There's probably a nonprofit who is dedicated to the thing that you're passionate about. So hopefully you have kind of a general feel good and then a more specific thing that you are doing good for something that you care about. So that's the easy one. That's what we all think of, like, right, that's why you do this. But there are additional benefits as well. So there is some huge opportunity here to fuel your career. And we're going to be talking about this as an organization a lot more this coming year on how to actually do this and get credit for it. So it's a huge resume builder, right? If you are looking for a job, if you are a recent graduate, this is a great opportunity to put something on your resume, something that people can look and feel, something that you can take a project from beginning to end, even if it's very small scope, and show that you're able to execute on a project. There's huge networking opportunities. You'll meet people. You'll talk to folks that you haven't talked to before. The way that nonprofits are structured, because they have a board that is in charge of every nonprofit. It's actually a rule of the IRS to be a nonprofit. You must have a board of directors. Those directors are often leaders within the community, so it's great to start forming those relationships and show your value to that network of people that you probably otherwise wouldn't have a way to contact. And then recommendations. So there are ways to actually ask for those recommendations from the nonprofits that you're working with. But if you're between gigs, if you're a recent grad, this is a huge opportunity to actually get some real experience under your belt. Also, this is a fun one. So there are great things to learn. So in addition to like working on a code base that somebody else built and reviewing that code and seeing what that is and looking at that new environment, you're also meeting a new team, whole different group of people. You're going to be learning how to work with a different group other than your day job, and that in and of itself has some great benefits. It's also an opportunity to learn a new discipline. So the great part with nonprofits, and most of them frankly are small. By the way, the majority of my topic today is going to be focused on these small nonprofits. They're the ones who often can't afford to pay somebody to help them with their technology needs. They have a great need, and their solutions can be pretty small and pretty simple in the large scheme of things. So there's some great things that you can do to learn a new language. Years ago, I actually started learning Grails. I knew a little bit of Rails. I knew nothing of Grails. And then I did the overnight website challenge and had a very, very accelerated introduction to Groovy and Grails. So that was pretty cool. I still use it on occasion. And I try to keep in touch with the Groovy community. So there's opportunities like that because you have to have some technical knowledge, but it is an opportunity to learn a new skill and a new discipline in that space as well. And finally, this is my favorite one. There's actually an opportunity to help you do better in your day job today. This is fairly new research. This is research that came out in 2016 around task switching and the whole concept of multitasking, right? So multitasking and working on multiple things has gotten a bad rap over the last 10 years because it is hard for the human mind to switch quickly from one task to another. it is easier for the human mind to switch in blocks of time. And when that happens, there's benefit. So it can increase your creativity. So you sort of get out of your tunnel vision of what the project that you're working on today. Look at something totally different. When you come back to your existing project, you're actually thinking differently, and your brain is being wired in a different way, in a more creative way as a result. Also reduces cognitive fixation. So cognitive fixation is that element that we all have experienced at some point where you are like you're trying to think of the name, right? I can't remember the name, I can't remember the name, I can't remember the name. And then all of a sudden you think of something else and then the name comes to you. That's cognitive fixation. When you're fixating too much on one thing, your brain gets stuck and can't move. When you kind of get out of that bubble and come back in, that sense of cognitive fixation reduces. So some really cool stuff about just having something else to think about other than the big project that you do all day. So there's some great benefits there too. All right, moving on to some how-tos. So we'll talk a little bit about how to start, how to move through, and how to conclude a project. So this is all based on some of our experience through our events and our engagements with nonprofits. It is, of course, not all-encompassing, but it's some of the things that we've seen work very well or be a challenge. So the first thing to decide, fairly obviously, is whether or not you want to offer ongoing support or offer a one-time project. Certainly, most devs that I know like the one-time project, right? It's very clear. I have a very defined start, I have a very defined end, and then I'm done, which is totally cool. There's a ton of need for that. There is also a need for ongoing support. The ongoing support can be very minimal in nature. As we all know, for instance, WordPress, right? Huge, huge base of sites using WordPress. Also a huge base of sites using old versions of WordPress or versions of WordPress that don't have the latest plugin updates or have security vulnerabilities. So that, if you find a nonprofit that is a good connection for you that you feel passionate about, it can be a pretty minimal engagement to work an hour or two a month to just do those updates. It helps them greatly, and as long as it's scoped tightly for that, it can not be a huge burden on you and give you some great benefit. So that's definitely the first thing to decide. The rest of everything I'm going to be talking about, for the most part, is going to be these one-time projects. That's, of course, the bulk of our experience at the Overnight Website Challenge, but we are going to be supporting some ongoing support options as well in the future. So in terms of projects, I mean, at the end of the day, it's a project, right? It follows all the normal project rules, project processes, and project do's and don'ts. So some of this stuff, those who are really experienced developers are going to be like, well, that's some of the do's and don'ts I have on here. You're going to be like, well, that applies to all projects. That's not just nonprofit. And yes, you're right. The majority of these are best practices for all projects, but they take on specific significance or help for the nonprofit projects, and we'll talk a little bit about why. So I'm going to go through 4 big buckets of the project phases. We'll talk about kicking off a project, defining what you're going to do in that project, and then we'll talk about actually the development phase and what that handoff looks like at the end of the project. And for each of these, I've cut it down to just like the top few buckets. These slides started off with like 15 things on this list. I'm trying to keep it short. There's a lot to talk about. But these are sort of my top pieces of advice. So the first one, so you've found a nonprofit. I'm going to skip that part for now. You found a nonprofit. You're in a meeting. You're talking about what is best for them and what this project could look like and how you could kick it off. First piece to think about is what has the most impact for this organization. What they are asking for and what actually benefits them the most may not be the same thing. They may be asking for something that is too simple or too hard. It could be something that is maybe beneficial to them at some point in the future, but they have a big burning need immediately that would be better addressed now. So that's something to really think about in the kickoff, is what would cause the most impact to the organization. I'll give you an example. So one of the nonprofits that we had a few years ago was called Companies to Classrooms. And it's a nonprofit that takes donated school supplies from corporations and individuals, has a big warehouse of school supplies, and then accepts requests from teachers for free school supplies, and then donates them out. They were asking for, at the Overnight Website Challenge, all the things we normally hear about, right? Upgraded design, better platform, easier to edit, social media integration. There's a lot of things they can do there. What the team learned in their first meeting and discussing was that this nonprofit had 3 full-time staffers who were going into their warehouse to look to see if they had inventory of whatever the teacher had requested. It was fully manual, entirely manual. So thankfully the team went, we could spend a lot of time on a really amazing design and new UX/IA for you, or we could take a look at a very simple warehouse management system for you and some inventory management. We can use some off-the-shelf kinds of tools for that, and then you're going to save 3 headcount. You're going to have people that you can deploy to do different things, because this is going to be such a game changer for how your organization operates. So that's the kind of thing. That's kind of an extreme example, but it's the sort of thing that these nonprofits don't realize what technology is capable of doing, and don't always understand where they're spending their time and how we could change that for them and make them more impactful. Second thing is their capabilities. So this is really important in terms of both their internal and external capabilities. Important to understand what tools they have today, what skill sets they have today, and where they're going, right? So some of them have great partnerships or great groups that they can depend on. Some of them absolutely do not. So it's just one of the big questions to ask and things to think about in terms of what are they actually able to do and capable of doing today, and where are they headed. Related to resource planning for them, I cannot tell you how many nonprofits engage with us and want a very heavy content marketing plan and have 0 people planned after launch to actually create and manage and publish that content. So with all of these, one of the first questions is always, hey, who's going to do this? And making sure that we're building something that is sustainable and manageable for them over time. And my big takeaway on this one is just making sure that we're solving the right problem, right? That's the thing that we can do in the kickoff more than anything else. So moving on to the definition phase. So scope. Because some of these projects are very small in nature, and the organization's small, and you may be 1 or 2 devs who want to work together on a project, there's a tendency, or at least a possibility, that you can say, oh, well, we don't really have to write it down. We kind of know what each other means because this is very small and it's very defined. I encourage you, just write it down. You don't have to do a full-blown 10-page scope document, but an email with some bullet points of what you're going to do, what you're going to start with, what the endpoint deliverable is going to be, is just hugely, hugely important. It sets the expectation for that nonprofit. A lot of times nonprofits are looking for volunteers who can engage with them and then stay engaged for the long term. So just starting with a written definition of scope of what you're going to do versus what you haven't signed up to do sets that expectation in their mind, so that you're not getting the calls all day, every day on like, oh, well, do you know anything about Google? And can you help me with Facebook? And can you do all these other things? It's like, no, these are the things I'm doing. We can talk about those maybe at a future point, but for now, this is my scope. You're going to get really sick of me talking about scope, but this is by far the #1 issue that we have, is that nonprofits get engaged with a person or a team that they like, and then They depend on that person or team heavily for everything under the sun. And then at some point, that person's like, I can't do this anymore. So avoid that up front by defining some scope. This is a perfect opportunity to use lean startup methodology. MVPs, minimum viable products, is absolutely essential for small nonprofits, right? They oftentimes have this view of what the full featured big thing will look like, and they don't always think about what that first release could be or how they could get 80% there with something smaller and more defined. So those who are familiar with that methodology depend on it heavily and help them understand what's possible. Which leads me to deployable. So we've had a few nonprofits who say, well, you know, I don't really need to launch it now. I just want you to spend like most of your time and build it most of the way there, and then like my cousin's brother, his friend can do the rest. That is a terrible idea. You want to get it to the point that you can actually deploy the solution and then hand off. Another quick story. We have a nonprofit who participated in, I believe, 2013. Did not really have a solid website solution at all, and the team at Overnight Website Challenge created a WordPress site for them. Got all the way through. The whole code base was set. All the database files were there. The nonprofit wanted to go check with their board of directors, check with a few of their primary funders, make sure everything was set. And they said, oh, we'll handle deployment on our own. So the team said, okay, great, perfect. Here's all your files, right? Here's your database, here's all your files, it's everything you need to deploy. That was in, I believe, 2013 or 2014. That nonprofit called me 2 months ago and said, we can't figure this out. We have all these files, we're ready to go now. Can you help us get this site launched? Oh my gosh, right? Like this has been sitting here for more than 3 years. And number one, this is gonna take some doing now, but the nonprofit didn't have an idea of what that would actually look like, what moving from files in a static point in time to actually having something live and functional for them on the database meant. So much better to actually get something actually out there, even if it's small. Yeah?
You don't have time to address this.
No.
Feel free to tell me to help. Are these people worth helping? Like, are they going to get value out of that? Seriously.
Yeah, no, it's a really good question. For that one specifically, we've actually have a different volunteer who's actually looking at that code base just to see if it's worth it at all. It's a nonprofit who actually has some functionality needs. Frankly, some of the nonprofits need a brochure site, right? If they need a brochure site, first of all, they probably won't make it into Overnight Website Challenge. At the challenge, we have about 10 developers on a team for 24 hours straight. So if what you need is an About Us page and a contact page and a home page and something about your services, I can't fill up 24 hours with that. So there are definitely places where a nonprofit should just like go to Squarespace and you're going to spend the same on Squarespace as you would with hosting and maintenance of a custom built site. So there's definitely times and places for that. But yes, it's a process to figure out whether or not to engage with those nonprofits.
Did you already cover, because I walked in late, or are you going to cover how to hook up with the nonprofits where it's going to do most of it?
Yes, I'm going to cover that later. That's actually my last thing. It's a little out of order, but you'll see why. Okay. So the takeaway from this phase, scope, write down scope, do scope. All right, in terms of development, and I've touched on this already a little bit, but thinking about what's good enough, what works for now, what gets them through. Sometimes we know the right thing to do and the perfect, beautiful, long-term solution, scaling that back to say, this pre-built solution that's out there gets you some of the way there and probably meets your needs for right now. Again, for Overnight Website Challenge, we get quite a few requests for e-commerce. E-commerce meaning I want to take donations and I have a t-shirt that I want to sell, right? So we do not want to do a whole custom e-commerce solution or even probably like a WooCommerce for them because there's just it's so much heavier than what they need. So how can we scale it back, make it simpler? They may spend a little bit more out of pocket to do that, but it'll get up and running faster and it'll be a better experience for them over time, which is something that takes some conversation with nonprofits because they tend to be very, very sensitive to any out-of-pocket costs. But helping them understand that none of these are like set it and forget it solutions. It's just not how the web works. Certainly one of our goals as an organization is to help nonprofits understand that element of thinking about their digital space. We do get quite a few. In fact, we had an applicant for this year's Overnight Website Challenge who's actually didn't make it into the semifinal level, but they were saying that they really needed a website that was easier to manage their content, that anybody could manage without a technical background, and they had some good explanation for all of that. And then we looked at what they're on right now, and they're on Squarespace. And we're like, well, I can't get easier than that for you. I'm sorry. Like, it would be great if there was just something where you could write in a Word document and your site would magically update, but you're gonna have to have somebody who's comfortable at least enough with the web interface that they can manage some kind of CMS interface to manage your content. So those are the kinds of things that they're just not always familiar with. Also, in terms of the development phase, communication. So working with your nonprofit to understand or to keep them informed, right? So you have scope, you know kind of generally how much time you're going to spend on this, over what kind of time frame, what you want to deliver. Ongoing communication throughout that to let them know where things stand with the project, what's done, what's yet to do. Weekly updates are a great example of that, but that kind of just communication solves a ton of problems. One of the concerns that we get from nonprofits is, hey, I just haven't heard from the person. And then they start getting really nervous because they don't know if anything's happening or not. And then thinking about the critical path, right? What things, if you run into a challenge, if something happens and something doesn't go as planned, defining that critical path to make sure that the scope that you defined at the outset and the objective, the business objective that you're trying to get done for them is actually achievable. So in this phase, certainly, if you know a PM or have PM skills yourself, super, super important. Everything on this list is project manager skills. Working with a project manager is a great opportunity. So if you have a friend who has PM skills or is a PM and can help you along with that, just to write those communication updates and keep you on task for this piece, that's a huge benefit.
What about being a Scrum Master instead?
Yes, Scrum Master as well. Yeah, yeah. Depending on whether you're using Agile or Waterfall, feel free to use either one of those. But yes, I mean, Agile is really, really great. Again, it takes some expectation setting with the nonprofit because they, of course, are most likely, not all, but most likely not familiar with Agile methodologies. And so they may not understand what happens in a sprint and the fact that there's a sprint after that. So we've had experience with some nonprofits where we say, yep, this is what's in this sprint, this is what's in the next sprint, and then you show them the deliverable at the end of sprint 1, and all their questions are things that are in future sprints. And you go, okay, those are in future sprints, let's go over the process and talk about how this works. So it's a big learning curve for them to sort of understand that all of these things come over time. But yes. All right. All right, deployment and handoff. I've talked to this a little bit already, but I really encourage you to actually deploy. So I've talked about this, so I won't like repeat the same stories again, but working with the hosting provider or actually getting it from a staging or dev environment into the production environment is hugely important. Your nonprofit most likely will not understand the difference. They'll see something in staging and they'll think, oh, it's done. Cool. I'm going to send this link out in my latest email newsletter. Like, no. That's your staging link. We haven't deployed yet. And that's just something that is magic to them, right? They don't understand that. So helping them to understand that we have to get this into its final environment and helping them through. So that's your end stage of this work is actually in the production environment. Documentation, again, this is where good project planning and completion, this applies to every project, but the more you can document, the better. As I said, they are dependent on these resources from around the community to get these things done. So the more that you can document either in the code or separate documentation about the logic that's used and what your code base looks like, the better. That includes both information for future developers who may be touching this, as well as the users at the nonprofit on how everything works and what it's doing. It doesn't have to be huge and long and complicated and perfect, but the more that you can put on paper, the less that's in your head. If you do like this nonprofit and they have a project in a year to do a next phase of work on this, you're going to want that documentation as well so you can remember what in the heck you did. Very, very helpful. And then finally here, writing a project summary. So similar to scope, actually writing just a bullet point list that says, I'm done. Here's what I did. And now I'm done. Again, helps set that expectation with nonprofits that here's what I said I was going to do, and now here's what I did. And just gets through a lot of those questions. And that's why I write here that handoff is in and of itself a thing that we need to think about very specifically for nonprofits because they're generally so unfamiliar with these processes and how these things work that they don't always understand what's done. So one of our common challenges, or most common, but about 90% of projects at Overnight Website Challenge are well received, complete, and great. That other 10% that have issues, one of the big issues that they have is that the ongoing support or the statement from the team about, we'll provide some ongoing support and bug fixes over time, that gets really squishy, right? Like everything else. So what's a bug fix versus what's an enhancement? What was meant to be there? What did we identify that needs to be changed or enhanced or modified over time? So the more you can put in the project summary to say this is what's done, and if there's anything left to do, trying to outline what is left to do is important. A few do's and don'ts. So recognizing the language barrier. So technologists speak in different words than nonprofits. Nonprofits have not only a non-technical language, but a language sort of all of their own. The very first thing is even the word development means something completely different. In nonprofit circles, development essentially means fundraising. So they'll have a development director that is in charge of their fundraising arm. So when you use even words like development, just quickly in the middle of a sentence, it can be received completely differently. So stopping, listening to them, making sure they understand, having them repeat things back to you, all of these things are very helpful to make sure that you're 100% in line. Do scope, I'm not going to go through that again, but really solves a ton of problems. Making sure you're thinking like a PM or a Scrum Master. As I've alluded to a couple times, consider pair work. So it is really helpful to have two people on a project, whether that's front end, back end, whether it's design or dev, whether it's like a full stack with a PM resource. Having two people is really helpful. It makes, it keeps you both accountable as well as sort of takes some of that burden off where you're sort of working on this project. And if you get stuck or you need somebody to talk to that does speak your language, having someone else there is really helpful. So get a friend and work together on that. And then the final one is just planning for maintenance. And I've alluded to that a couple times too, but just making sure that while your scope is through deployment, your nonprofit will need to have somebody assigned for who's going to manage this on an ongoing basis, at least who's the point person who knows this tool, and helping them understand what kind of maintenance is required. So this will be, an hour a week of your time to update content, or this will be a few hours a month to manage these elements or do these settings in the admin tools. Those kinds of things are really important. Things to avoid. Internal alignment. So I mentioned all nonprofits have a board of directors. They usually have an executive director or some chief officer, and then they have staff. When you are meeting with someone, you may meet with 1 or 2 people from that nonprofit. They have a host of other stakeholders that need to be involved. Only a few times in our overnight website challenge experience, but it has happened a couple times, we have internal alignment that's not there, right? Where the person who came to the challenge from the nonprofit thought they knew what they wanted. We built a whole solution, deployed it, they went back, and someone, whether it was on their board of directors or one of their primary funders, said, why did you do that? You shouldn't have done that at all. We should have done this completely differently. We should have put other priorities ahead of this one. And so that one, the fix for that is just asking those questions, right? Being able to say, who are those other stakeholders? Who needs to buy into this? Do we need to have other people in the room? Do you need to have other meetings and get back to me? How do we make sure that everybody is in line with this? Again, that helps with your scope document, right? They can take that, they can say, okay, go shop this around, go make sure that you have buy-in internally in your organization. Assuming they understand, this goes back to that language barrier. You may say things that are very clear to you that are received completely differently, right? We've had a couple, not part of Overnight Website Challenge, but a couple of other engagements that we've helped out with where a back-end server-side dev has created a database, and they've said, yeah, I'm not going to do front-end for you. I'm just going to do the back-end, and then I can work with a front-end developer, right? When you, nonprofit, identify who that should be, I can work with them on the next phase. That nonprofit, by and large, does not understand the difference between front-end and design, and certainly doesn't understand all the things that it takes to go from a back-end database to a functional user-facing tool. And so they may, when they hear front-end, say, oh, well, I've got somebody who did our logo. I'll just lean on that person. Like, oh my gosh, no. So those are the kinds of things that can happen and can be avoided as long as there's a little bit more conversation. And again, if you get through deployment, if there's a plan or a resource, like don't start until you have a plan to get through deployment, those kinds of challenges can be avoided. Going on tangents. Almost every nonprofit engagement that you will have a meeting and there will be some other tangent, right? So they'll say, oh yeah, I get it, we're gonna use Google Apps for some of this stuff, cool. And I heard that there's AdWords for nonprofits, so can you tell me a little bit about how AdWords works? And can we talk about that? And just, no, no, we cannot talk about that. You can put it in a parking lot, you can say, that's something we can talk about at another time, but you can go down a whole lot of rabbit holes that you can never come back from when that happens. So just be really careful about tangents because it can take you farther and farther and farther away. Signing on for future projects midstream. This is another thing that you will hear. You'll be halfway through your project. You'll be doing a great job. You have a scope. You've been providing updates. You're engaged. You're delivering. They're so happy. And then they start bringing up, we have this other need. And there's this other thing that we need. And there's this other thing. And not now, no, but can we start talking about this other thing? I encourage you to just say, you know what, write that down. We can talk about that, but let's get this one out the door. Because otherwise you're going to put in way too many hours on too many things. And of course, your existing project is going to slow down because you're spending time and effort talking about future projects. And the last one here, so I've talked about scope. At the same time, and this has happened only a minute amount of times, but there is the possibility to go overboard on the scope thing, right? So being able to say like, no, this is the scope that I defined, and nothing's changing for this. As we all know, every project has some element of change or things that are learned in the development process. So while you need to have scope, while you need to define what you're going to do and what you're not going to do, be open to making adjustments as they make sense.
For the sign on future projects thing,
Yeah.
what if the nonprofit organization or whatever says like this is more important, like this future project than this, so we want you to kind of slow down on this and work on this.
Exactly. So it's a great question. So what if your nonprofit comes back to you and says, we actually have a higher priority thing than what you're doing? And that can certainly happen. What I'd encourage you to do is stop your current project and actually get that clarity from them to say, all right, I hear you. You got this other thing that's more important than this thing. I'm not going to work on both of them. I'm going to work on one. So if you'd like me to stop this, I have a little bit of work right now to do some documentation, to do some closure on this one so that we're at a stopping point. And then we can move to this other thing, if you're up for the new thing, right? You didn't sign on for that. So it's something that can happen, but the danger is taking on both and starting to work on both.
So, like working for or doing the work for a nonprofit, they're kind of leaning on you and they rely on you to do the stuff. And you probably shouldn't back out of things, but at what point, like, should you say I can't do this anymore?
Yeah. At what point should you say I can't do this anymore? So, you can go back to scope a little bit more. So. So if you have defined what you're going to deliver, if you have delivered that, that is a perfect time to step away, right? If for some reason it's just not working out, things are not meshing between you, and there's a personality problem, or like requirements are changing, or they just can't kind of get their stuff together, or it's taking too long, right? You thought this was going to be a month long, but then you didn't get the assets, or you didn't get the information that you needed, and then now it's turning into like a 6-month thing. The more documentation that you have of that, the easier that conversation becomes, right? Being able to say, look, I had written what I said I was going to do. I thought it would take a month. Thought it would take about 40 hours worth of work. I was going to do that on weekends. It was going to be great for you. We're now 6 months in. I still don't have the definition of your database fields that I need. And I need to move on. So here's what I have done. Here's what I have yet to do, so that they have some documentation and can go to someone else to get that done. The last piece I'd mention with that is, and then I'll get to you. Last piece to mention with that is that they will then be looking for another resource to get that done, right? So a key decision you need to make is whether you are open to talking to their new dev, right? If you can, technologist to technologist conversations tend to be easier ones to have. So if you're at all able and willing to talk to the person that you're handing off to, whether that's now or at some point in the future, I'd really encourage you to do that. It just makes the project better, makes the whole thing work better, and certainly is a big step up for that new resource that they have. It is much tougher when the relationship goes sour and the dev says, I'm not done, or I'm not doing anything more, and I'm not talking to anybody about this ever again, right? That's just really hard, and it's really putting the nonprofit in the position that they're just going to need to start from scratch. They're not going to be able to leverage anything you did, which is rough. So yeah.
So far you've spent about the last 30 minutes convincing me that I never, ever want to do this.
Oh no!
You're working with idiots and you have to be a PM, which I hate. I'd love it if you spend a little more time telling me why this is worth it, or what we can get out of it, or something to drag me out of a pit of despair.
Oh.
I'm about done.
that is such a that makes my head hurt. I wanted to make sure that we like avoid pitfalls. I may have spent a little too much time talking about the pitfalls.
Well, edge cases, maybe, by the way.
Exactly, they are edge cases. Like I said, about 90% of our projects go very well, right? People are documenting what they're going to deliver. They deliver it. It works very well. Your nonprofits, by the way, are going to be so happy and excited to have a resource like you. You have literally never felt as appreciated because everything that you do all day long is magic. They do not understand the capabilities of what's possible here, and they're super, super appreciative. So some of those things with like day-to-day conversations about how the project is going, when you show them the first screens, even if they're not styled of how the workflow is going to work for a new app, they will gush. They will, like, you know, you get like in your day job, you get your manager telling you that that things are not going perfectly. Then you go to your nonprofit and you are like the hero. It is kind of an amazing feeling, especially when you do something. I helped one nonprofit move from like Gmail to Google Apps using their domain. I got thank you letters for like 18 months. Like, you know, like their board of directors is sending me notes like how much more professional their organization is considered now that they do this because what I did for them was magic. Like, oh my God, this is not this hard. So there's some amazing things. So thank you for bringing that up. I have only a very few more seconds, so I'm going to talk about finding a pro bono project. This is the tough part. So there are not great resources available right now for getting hooked up to a nonprofit. One that I'll get to them. They're not great resources. We're building some. So some of the ones that do exist, certainly lean on your network. People that you know, nonprofits that you know or are familiar with, nonprofits that you like. If you reach out to a nonprofit and say, hey, I'd like to get involved, I'd like to help you with technical stuff, you will be put to work. They will find things for you to do, and those things will be largely very, very simple and very straightforward. I was brought in for one that needed help with a database. I got in, I found out that they needed help setting up their Excel spreadsheets so that they didn't have to do double and triple entry of their numbers. Like, come on, right? But that's an hour. They were thinking of like hiring a developer to do that. I'm like, oh my God, no, let's just do this right now before I leave. We'll just fix this for you. So some of those things are big wins for them and very minor effort for you. The Taproot Foundation and Catch-A-Fire are two opportunities that link skills-based volunteering with nonprofits that need them. Taproot is very broad. It's like any skill, anywhere, and any nonprofit, nationally and internationally, very broad. Catch-A-Fire, I have a little. I really liked Catch-A-Fire for a while. It's very like a Match.com kind of thing for professionals and nonprofits. I learned in the last couple of weeks that they actually charge the nonprofits on the back end every time they do a match, and those fees are in like the thousands of dollars. So I don't know enough about it to recommend them or to say stay away from them, but it just kind of makes me feel a little oogie that like professionals would be donating their time pro bono and then nonprofits have to pay anyway. That just seems weird to me. So I'm a little nervous about Catch-A-Fire. And now I have some shameless plugs. So Overnight Website Challenge, again, coming up next month. I actually extended registration. We were going to end it last week, and then I realized I was speaking today, and so we looked at the calendar and tried to figure out how we could leave registration open a few more days. So it's going to close tomorrow at midnight. We have 9 teams so far. We have a potential of 17 nonprofits that have made it to this round who want to be paired with one of those 9 teams. We do have room for a few more teams. If you're interested, you'd go onto overnightwebsitechallenge.com, and you can form a team or you can join an existing team. And then my second shameless plug. So this thing about not having a ton of tools available, we're building one. We're building one specifically, this sort of match.com for technologists specifically with nonprofits. So we're not trying to solve the world's problems of everyone who has a skill. We're talking about what we know best, which is technology. So we're building a platform where technologists can create a profile, set their preferences, and then nonprofits can do the same and identify the projects that they want to get done. We are in UXIA right now, so you'll see a lot of lorem ipsum on these slides. But this is the model. So you'd be able to set your preferences and then go in and find opportunities by looking at the skills that you have, so front-end, back-end dev, the kinds of nonprofit categories that you want to help. So I want to do something for animal rescue, for instance. Your availability, whether you want to do a one-time project, ongoing support, big or small projects, whether you want to do something on the weekends, all of those kind of filters, as well as your location, and then the technologies and tags. That's probably the most important one and what I see as missing from the rest of those other tools that are available. Because just saying you're a dev is not that helpful, right? If your nonprofit is on .NET and you're a PHP dev, that's not going to work. You're not going to be able to help them. So we want to build this with the technology in mind and thinking about what your actual skills are.
What is that
Any-
called, or what would you search for?
So it's not there yet. We'll be launching it in the summertime.
Find it when it goes live.
So nerderyfoundation.org is our web address. We'll be promoting the heck out of it. But yes, we're looking forward to that.
There's just 1 minute until the next presentation starts, so there's people coming and going into this room,
Cool.
and probably making it to other rooms. So just 30 seconds maybe, and
Yeah, exactly. Any other final questions or comments or anything else?
Thank you.
Thank you.
awesome.
Thanks.